Welcome into the Conference Championship Sharp Football Analysis Podcast. My name is Warren Sharp of sharpfootballanalysis.com and sharpfootballstats.com. I am joined, like I always am, by Evan Silva of rotoworld.com. And guys, we've got basically just one more day of great football before the Super Bowl. And I think both of these games are compelling. There's tons of storylines all over the place that I think we're going to really be able to do a good job of breaking down for you. We're going to hit the point spreads, some of the line movement, some injury information that you're not going to find on any other podcast because we are recording this overnight on Friday night because we're psychotic like that. I might as well bring in Evan right now. You can follow him on Twitter at Evan Silva of rotoworld.com. Evan, we had a great divisional round last week. I know we both say that that's our favorite weekend of the year. So many great games. I don't care what anybody says. Like, NFL is a great sport to watch, especially this time of year. What was your thoughts about the way that those games transpired, and are you looking forward to these two on Sunday?
It was just a blast watching all of them. Even the one that wasn't close, the Patriots against the Titans, I had a great appreciation for that game because we saw that what the Patriots did relative to what the Chiefs did against the Titans in the wild card round, and the Patriots put on an absolute game planning clinic. We talked extensively every single week about how teams playing the Titans needed to attack them with running backs in the passing game. The Chiefs threw to their running backs 5 times in the wild card round. Patriots threw to their running back 17 times in the divisional round. And just love seeing a team accentuate their strengths and exploit the weaknesses of their opponent like that. All the other 3 games were super dramatic, but that one, I had a special appreciation for because I just really like teams doing optimal things, and the Patriots, they put on a clinic in that game.
They absolutely did. It was one of those games that was a little bit predictable. I know we gave up the prop of Tom Brady completions over, and that almost cashed in the first half. But that I 100% agree, could not agree with you more. And we'll talk a little bit later about, using analytics to predict things and break things down, and using analytics to help game plan, and why teams don't use that a little bit more, and why some teams excel when they use them. Those are obvious things, and I don't understand why teams don't utilize them more. I view it as like more of an arrogant approach. Like, some people think that using analytics is like this hoity-toity type, like, oh, you think you're so much better than us football guys, so to speak. The reality of it is, when you're willing to incorporate that into your philosophy and your approach towards football, it's actually taking a more humble approach to things and a less of an arrogant approach. The arrogant approach is, well, we just think we're good and we've got great players, so we're just going to do what we do. And the analytic style approach is, if we intentionally attack your strengths from the other team, we might not win. So we have to figure out what your weaknesses are, and that's what we're going to intentionally try to attack, and that's one of the things the Patriots do quite well. So it's the exact opposite of the impression that, if you're using analytics, you're some sort of nerd and you think you're so much better. You actually are realizing that there's direct ways to go about attacking an opponent the most efficient way possible, and if you avoid that and choose an alternative method, it's more difficult and might wind up in a loss, and you really want to win and you love winning, and so you're going to try to use every advantage to do so. I love those games as well. These games quite compelling. Before we dive into these games, I wanted to give each of us a little bit of a chance to share some of what we're going to be working on and what we've got going on sort of other platforms, because obviously the season's sort of winding down. So I haven't had a chance to listen to it, but I know from having talked to you on the phone the night before, you were prepping and getting ready to crush a podcast on the Cleveland Browns and their front office movement and their strategy. So go ahead and talk a little bit about that high level, where people can listen to it, how they can check that out, because it might not be something they want to dial in, ASAP, but definitely once these games end, if you haven't checked it out by then, Monday, Tuesday, you better go back and listen to that and see what you had to say there. And then, of course, you guys over at Roto World, prepping for free agency, prepping for the draft, so much different things are going to be in the works down the road. Maybe you can talk to some of that.
Yeah, the podcast with Matt Kelly. I know you have gone on his podcast before. Pretty entertaining host. He's just definitely a smart guy, huge analytics guy. And, of course, being analytics guys ourselves, we had a great interest in the Browns and seeing what would happen with them, because all teams to some extent use analytics, but some teams don't use them a lot. The Browns intended to use them a lot. And so we had, some interest in seeing how they would do. And on the podcast with Matt Kelly, we talked about how things went wrong, essentially, and really how the analytics movement in Cleveland actually provided the team with a long-term foundation to be able to build very, very quickly, and how the mainstream media just totally doesn't get it. And it should be a pretty interesting podcast. I mean, I think that anybody that was listening to this podcast probably has some level of interest in analytics, and I think it would be, people would probably be interested. The hardcore Browns talk starts about, 15, 16, 17 minutes in. So you can skip the intro. The intro stuff is pretty good anyways, but the podcast is about an hour and 15 minutes. As for what's coming up, we are going to be jumping into draft coverage pretty soon. After the Super Bowl, I'm going to publish a team needs article on all 32 teams. And then we'll start really ramping into free agency. Franchise tags will be handed out. We will have a bunch of re-signings before free agency. You can look at the free agency tracker on Roto World. That's going to be depleted considerably. It's also going to get supplemented by players that get released by teams, usually due to exorbitant contract prices. But yeah, I mean, it's not really going to stop moving. It's obviously not like training camp, not like the season where something's happening every minute of every hour of every day. But there's going to be things to pay attention to in the NFL every single day, every single week. That's how it is at this point, with the heavy coverage of the most popular sport in America.
Absolutely. So, again, guys, that podcast is Roto Underworld. It's done by Matt Kelly, and Evan has it. He tweeted it out. It'll be one of his more recent tweets, and I will also retweet it, so you can check that out. You can follow me on Twitter at @SharpFootball. In terms of some stuff that I'm going to be working on here, as soon as the conference championships end and the Super Bowl matchup is set, I really kick into gear with a strong Super Bowl preview. I start working on it right away. It's like, I think this year it's probably going to be like 8 or 9 PDF pages with graphics. I work on that for about a week, the better part of a week, and then get that out basically with 1 week to go. Now, the only caveat would be if some sort of factor is going on with the point spread or the total that we need to wait on. And but I've never released it less than like 5 or 6 days before the game. So that's something that I will be working on a ton to get ready for you all. And then, of course, I'll be working on my 2018 football preview, which you should be able to find up at Amazon again this year. Lots of great reviews. Really appreciate all the strong feedback that gets, because that really does help generate interest in analytics, interest in, the stats website, chartfootballstats.com, which we're continuing to grow. It's been about a year and a half since that thing's been cranking away, and so much positive feedback on that, that I'm going to be working on that a lot this spring in addition to the 2018 football preview. So we're going to be redesigning some things, adding new features to things, a lot of great ideas in store for Sharp Football Stats. So hopefully you guys will be able to check that out. Hopefully you guys are going to be checking out Roto World for all the free agency and draft news and information. So with that said, let's go ahead and start talking about the first game that's going to kick off on Sunday. That's the Jacksonville Jaguars New England Patriots matchup. That game essentially opened at most spots around 9. It actually got bet up. It took a little bit of New England Patriots money early, but that was solely for the purpose of trying to grab 10 on Jacksonville. So some guys, some of the sharper guys came in, grabbed Jacksonville plus 10, dropped that line more or less down to 8.5. And it pretty much was at around 8.5 until we got word on Wednesday that Tom Brady's throwing hand was injured and maimed in some way in practice. And details were not very readily available at that point in time. And the point spread actually was 9 at some spots, 8.5 at others. And pretty much, it started to take a little bit of money towards Jacksonville at that point in time. And yesterday, the point spread at most shops was down to 8. And then, of course, we had the 8.5. There were still a few 8.5s. We had the press conference today, Evan, where, Tom Brady, they showed practice yesterday. They showed practice today. In both cases, Brady is just out there wearing these red gloves, not doing anything. And interestingly, he's walking around and he's stretching his left calf muscle while he's walking, grabbing his left ankle, but he's not doing anything, his quad muscle, but he's not doing anything with his right arm, his right hand. He comes into the press conference indoors wearing the gloves yet again, sets the right hand on the podium, and basically doesn't move it for the entirety of the press conference. It's just resting there. He occasionally will pull out his toboggan hat or, adjust something else with his left hand, but his right hand is basically like almost like a wooden hand, just kind of sitting there, not really doing much of anything. So everybody pretty much knew at that point, hey, something is clearly not right. Like there's so many different ways that this could go. It could be a minor issue. It could be an issue where he's not even going to be able to play in the game, and they're going to have to go with the backup, which would have been a huge story considering they got rid of, Garoppolo out to San Francisco earlier this year. So there was, Hoyer would have started. So there was a lot of uncertainty at that point. Or what are we even going to get out of Tom Brady? As soon as that press conference ended, money came in on the Jacksonville Jaguars pretty strongly based upon the lack of him doing anything, as well as the under in the game, dropping the total down from 46.5 to where it sits right now, which is basically painted everywhere at 45. This thing opened at 46.5, got up to 47, and is now sitting at 45, essentially primarily because of Tom Brady's question marks about his hand issue. And then, of course, the spread on the game is basically 7, a couple 7.5, but for the most part, everywhere that's more or less 7 as we are recording this. With all of that being said, Evan, I'll turn it over to you. Go ahead and first discuss everything that you currently know about the hand issue, with the caveat, of course, that we aren't inside there. We don't know 100% of the details, but there's been some decent reporting, and we have a little bit more than we had even this afternoon. So go ahead and share some of what we know, what we think is going on there, and then go ahead and start discussing the matchup.
So I think that the best report that I read on the situation was from Dr. David Chow, who, of course, we mentioned last week. He predicted that Antonio Brown would be very close to full strength last week and would be a full go. And, of course, Antonio Brown had 7 catches for 132 yards and 2 touchdowns. And if you played Antonio Brown in daily fantasy last week, you won money. And so And that's not just a one-shot sample. Like Dr. David Chow is extremely accurate with his video analysis and his medical background, being able to assess and predict how injuries are going to affect players. He's really incredible. And ultimately in his report, which is really worth reading, because you can just learn a lot about the different ranges of outcomes. I mean, you have to understand that it's not, there are a couple of different things that could be in play here, but he's using like deductive analysis and reading tea leaves, and in the end, he basically predicts that Tom Brady is going to be fine. And so I trust Dr. David Chow because he has gotten so much right consistently with his with his medical evaluations. And even let's say that he is not even necessarily that he's hindered, but the Patriots are concerned about him becoming hindered during the game. There are ways that they can work around that. One would be to just focus on shorter passing and higher percentage completions. And you, of course, are going to talk about how the Jaguars are very the extremely stout in 11 3-receiver personnel, but they can be damaged by 21 and 12 personnel. 21 personnel, of course, 2-back formations. 12 personnel, of course, 2 tight end formations. Last week, against this same Jaguars defense, what we saw the Steelers do is use a bunch of Vance McDonald. Vance McDonald was one of the biggest keys to their game plan. He led the team in targets, and the way that they got him the ball was through a lot of shovel passes and tight end screens. And those are absolutely things that Rob Gronkowski is capable of, and it doesn't put a lot of pressure on your quarterback to take you're not asking your quarterback to take a long drop, wind up, and make a throw downfield where he needs all of his grip on the ball. A lot of them were legit, like almost underhanded shovel passes to Vance McDonald. Rob Gronkowski is a better athlete than Vance McDonald. Vance McDonald's a very good athlete, but Rob Gronkowski is a truly elite athlete. That's a little, wrinkle that the Patriots could kind of steal from the Steelers, and the Steelers had great success doing that. Another one would be to put running backs next to 2 running backs, one to the left of Tom Brady, one to the right of Tom Brady, and hand the ball off out of that formation, or throw little dump-off passes out of that formation. And it not only does it take some of the pressure off of Tom Brady's hand and his grip on the football, but it simultaneously helps exploit one of the Jaguars' weakness, as you will talk about a little bit more in depth. And the Patriots have 3 running backs that they can use like that. Rex Burkhead is due back this week. He is, one of the most versatile running backs in the game. James White, one of the best receiving backs in the game. And Dion Lewis has drawn 5, 7, and 10 targets in the Patriots' last 3 games. I believe we talked about this last week, how the Jaguars had, late in the season, shown vulnerability to running backs in the passing game. In Week 16, Kyle Juszczyk was a huge part of the 49ers game plan. 5 catches for 76 yards. In Week 17, Derrick Henry hit a 66-yard screen pass touchdown against the Jags. Bills running backs had 7 catches against the Jags in the wild card round. And, of course, last week, Le'Veon Bell had 9 catches for 88 yards and a touchdown receiving against the Jags.
Yeah, so and one thing that I want to discuss with you, remind me, Evan, once I finish talking about this article, some of those matchups, is the shotgun and what they might need to do with the shotgun because of this hand injury. I know Chow was speculating on some of that, but I'll ask that question momentarily of you. But first, I wanted to dive into this article. So essentially, it kind of gained a little bit of ground. I was brought on to do a number of different radio interviews in markets to discuss this article that I don't usually appear on this past week. I'm on a number of different radio stations later in the week discussing the games on a regular basis each week, but a number of news stations wanted me on to discuss this article. And, Bill Simmons incorporated it into his weekly picks article, made a couple of other splashes on like Bleacher Report stream and that sort of thing. But essentially what I was doing is it was completely innocuous. I was trying to look at the teams that had some success against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I was studying them. Obviously, I know the Titans swept them this year. And then I went ahead and watched that game against the San Francisco 49ers. Now, San Francisco 49ers earlier in the season used a lot more 11 personnel. And for people that aren't quite as familiar with personnel groupings, it's basically, you've got your offensive linemen that are always out on the field, and you've always got your quarterback. And so that accounts for 6 players that are always on the field. There are 5 more players that basically make up the offense. And those 5 players are some combination of wide receivers, tight ends, and running backs. And the way that they use the terminology for the personnel groupings is that the first number that you list is the number of running backs. The second number that you list is the number of tight ends. So, and the rest are the number of wide receivers that you subtract out of the other 2 numbers out of 5. So, for example, in 11 personnel, 11 means 1 running back and 1 tight end, 1 and 1. The rest you have is 3 other players. Those are the wide receivers. The NFL averages to use 59% 11 personnel. Across the league, it's an 11 personnel league. And I actually speculated in my 2017 preview that I felt like the future of the NFL was in less wide receivers and more of the 21 or 12 type of groupings, because most teams had better efficiency using those groupings and could create better mismatches and things of that. So that was well before the season even started. But let's fast forward to the game against the San Francisco 49ers. Now, at Sharp Football Stats, I have a personnel grouping page that you could actually look at, and you could filter for like, okay, show me what the personnel groupings are on first down. Show me what they are on third down. There's so many different ways that you can cut through this information and see it for the entire league. And nobody else really out there that I've ever seen has information like that. So it's a great resource if you want to study this in a little bit more detail. You can find it at Sharp Football Stats. But I don't have Week 16 up there. And Week 16 is when Jacksonville played San Francisco. That week hasn't been charted yet. So I went back and manually charted it real quick as I was rewatching the game, just a couple days ago. Let's say, I believe it was Monday night when I was doing this. And what I noticed is San Francisco ran 11 personnel extremely infrequently, ran a ton of 21 personnel, and that's 2 running backs, 1 receiver. Now they have Juszczyk, the fullback, who is very adept at catching passes out of the backfield. He's a very dynamic player. Obviously was paid considerably as one of the best free agent, highest free agent acquisitions at the fullback position this offseason, kind of like a blue chip guy that they brought in. So of course he is a little bit more dynamic of a player. But the San Francisco 49ers used 11 personnel, just 32% of the time in the game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. As I just mentioned, the league average is about double that. And they had a ton of success when they were using fewer than 3 wide receivers out there. So I ended up using the tools at Sharp Football Stats, and what I found was pretty astonishing to me. And that's why I decided to end up putting it in this article so I could share it with more people as opposed to just putting it in a write-up for my clients. And what I found was that when opposing offenses line up on the field in 3 wide receiver sets, 3 or more, so 3 or 4 or even 5, very rarely used, those teams do not bode well they don't fare well against Jacksonville Jaguars defense. Only 39% of their passes are successful. Only 5 yards per attempt are gained. Both of those best in the NFL. And they allow just a 59 passer rating. That's second best in the league. One of the reasons why they're so good in those types of formations is Jacksonville has such a great pass rush. So picture this. Let's say you've got 4 wide receivers. You've got a tight end blocking on the line of scrimmage to help with your pass pro. You've got a running back. The running back may or may not even be able to get out into a route in case he needs to pick up one of the pass rushers because Jacksonville's pass rush is so good. But let's say maybe the running back sometimes gets out of the backfield and sometimes he doesn't. Essentially, you've got 3 wide receivers just running routes against like nickel defense. They're very good with their cornerbacks at guarding wide receivers, and it's just very difficult to get anything done. That's the Jacksonville Jaguars defense that you're accustomed to seeing on SportsCenter, that you're accustomed to reading about and seeing as his number 1 defense in the NFL against the pass. They're great in those situations. However, when those same exact teams during the games this past year decided with the same quarterbacks, let's take off an extra wide receiver, let's add an extra running back, or let's add an extra tight end, let's only put 1 or 2 wide receivers out there, let's use base package so that we can be a little bit more multiple, so that we can cause a little bit more conflict for the Jacksonville Jaguars defense, so that we can keep their base defense in there and we can attack Paul Posluszny in coverage. Then this Jacksonville Jaguars defense becomes extremely, extremely mediocre and or pedestrian. Their success rate allowed drops from 39% down to 55%. That's 23rd in the NFL. Their yards per attempt allowed goes from 5 yards per attempt all the way down to 9.6 yards per attempt, nearly double. That's the 5th worst in the NFL. And passer ratings from opposing quarterbacks goes from 59 all the way up to 99. So the bottom line was so much more efficient when you use base personnel, and then you can become more multiple, just like you were saying, Evan. You can have 2 different running backs on the field at the same time so that you can always have a threat of the run, but pass to one of the guys out of the backfield. You can still have 2 wide receivers running routes. You can you can have 2 tight ends. One of them can be staying at home to block. The other one can release and go out on a pattern. There's just so many different things that you can do out of that formation to really attack and expose a lot of the middle of the field, the underbelly of the defense. And so that's the main thing that this article was uncovering, was that's the strategy by which teams are having success beating the Jaguars. And if you look at a lot of the teams that they faced who use very low 11 personnel rates, those teams were winning a lot of games. And if you look at what the Patriots do, the Patriots are one of the teams that falls into that category of teams that use very little 11 personnel as their base offense. They like to use a lot of 12 and 21 personnel, and they're already built and set up well to attack the Jacksonville Jaguars pass defense without really modifying anything. So in my opinion, for the New England Patriots, it's just do what we do, but accentuate what we do. And one of the things that I found through my research, you really don't want to throw the ball often to wide receivers when you rarely use 11 personnel. What you ideally want to do in those situations is run the ball, because Jacksonville has given up so many large runs when you run the ball out of 11 personnel. You can throw the ball to running backs or tight ends. Throwing to wide receivers out of 11 is a very bad idea. But you can attack the other positions and running the ball out of that out of those groupings very strong. And then for passing, I mean, obviously you want the New England Patriots, and you hope that they're going to use a lot of the skills, a lot of the people that they have who are talented and are capable of exploiting this defense with that base personnel. So I don't think the New England Patriots have to change a lot. I do foresee a lot of passes to running backs out of the backfield. I do foresee a lot of crossing routes over the middle of the field, because Jacksonville plays a lot of man coverage. And so, I mean, that's one of the things that has disrupted Tom Brady in the past. But you can use a lot of rub routes and pick routes on man coverage with a lot of success. So I really think that the New England Patriots absolutely can still have success as long as Tom Brady's hand is not, horribly impaired, and he can grip the ball with his thumb and still throw the ball down the field. I think that they are going to be able to have success, even though this defense is so formidable, and even though this defense is one of the best, the best pass defense that they have seen. I think they're well built to have more success than a lot of people think against it. I'll let you kind of riff off that, Evan. Anything else you want to add to any of that discussion, or do you want to go ahead and maybe start talking about any other Patriots matchups, or flip over to talk about Blake Bortles and what the Jaguars will do offensively?
Yeah, the reason that the Jaguars are so good in 11 personnel, at least via my interpretation, and you did touch on it, is because NFL, like in the NFL, it's viewed that a two tight end or a two running back set, especially a two running back set, is viewed as like a base package, and that is a way to get the opponent's base defense or onto the field. And so in the base defense, as you mentioned, Paul Posluszny plays, and Paul Posluszny is a guy that, like, you know, he's had a long, great career, but at this point the Jaguars are trying to like weed him out, and they play Telvin Smith and Miles Jack, two of the most athletic linebackers in the NFL. They play those guys way more, but you know, in the NFL these days, most teams play way more of their sub package, their passing down defense. And so when you force them into their base defense, and this is what I think the Patriots are going to try to do. They're going to try to play fast, and they are going to try to they're going to try to get the Jags in their base defense. They're going to try to play fast, and they're going to try to, you know, fire off plays so that the Jaguars can't sub out Paul Posluszny. And we have seen historically so many instances of the Patriots attacking inside linebackers in pass coverage, because typically, you know, those guys aren't very good in pass coverage. Some guys can do it. You know, I mean, there are some really special linebackers in the NFL that can hang as pass coverage linebackers, but very few. Telvin Smith and Miles Jack would be on the higher end of that. Paul Posluszny would definitely be on the lower end of that. I think it was last year in the playoffs, the Patriots attacked Bernardrick McKinney relentlessly in pass coverage, the Texans inside linebacker. He's like a big, you know, he's like a big run stuffer, 250-pound guy, and they just go after him relentlessly. Lawrence Timmons, when they would play the Steelers, they would attack him in pass coverage. And then the reason that they're so strong in 11 personnel is because that is when offenses are essentially attacking the teeth, the strength of the Jaguars defense, because in 11 personnel, the Jaguars will stick Jalen Ramsey. It's usually, well, oftentimes it'll be Jalen Ramsey on the number one receiver. Sometimes they'll just leave Jalen Ramsey at left corner, A.J. Bouye at right corner, Aaron Colvin in the slot. And that's the best cornerback tandem in the NFL. This year they overtook the Broncos as having the best cornerback trio in the NFL. And so you're like attacking their strengths. That's, as we kind of discussed at the top, obviously not what you want to do. So I expect the Patriots to be smart about this and to try to keep Paul Posluszny on the field with their tempo. And absolutely, we can start talking about the Jags now.
One last thing that I did want to touch on there was one of the elements with Tom Brady's hand injury that I think will factor in. So far, he has not taken any snaps under center. And obviously, he's hurt his right hand. And I think maybe now would be a good time. You mentioned Dr. Chow and what he thinks like the limitations could be, and he did a good job of breaking that down. But obviously, I think, Evan, that this has been discussed by a number of people that there was I don't know if it's hyperextension, but the thumb was bent back. The web space between the index finger and the thumb was torn. Chow believes that it was torn from the inside to the outside based upon like a slight dislocation of the thumb that then obviously went back into place. But that required stitches in that web space between the thumb and the index finger to close up the wound. It was bleeding. And, if you are taking snaps from under center, that football is hitting your throwing hand because the way that obviously a right-handed quarterback is taking it, his left hand is under the football and his right hand is resting right on the butt of the center, and that ball gets snapped right into his throwing hand, which is his right hand, and then he can immediately bring that up to his shoulder in throwing position as he's making his drop back. Well, the New England Patriots, so Tom Brady hasn't taken yet any snaps from under center. Chow thinks and is speculating that Brady will probably wear a glove during the game, even though Brady doesn't like to wear gloves, just to provide extra protection, I assume, or support, and that Chow also predicts that he should be able to take snaps under center. But my question, and I mean, a lot of this is just pure speculation, and so take that for what it's worth. I don't have any clue as to what they're exactly going to do. But if I'm Tom Brady and I'm playing in a game this magnitude, I don't want any risk of like opening this cut back up and having any other types of issues, because as Chow astutely mentioned, you know, some people were speculating, oh, they can just get a shot of Toradol in that and it won't feel much pain. Or, oh, you could just take some, you know, Advil or ibuprofen and whatnot. But, you know, Brady's not going to want anything to cloud his mental state. So he's not going to want to take anything that would, you know, counteract his entire body. So he would want some type of localized thing. But these are your fingers and your thumb, and you need to feel the ball, especially if you're wearing a glove and you're not used to wearing a glove. So the odds, in my opinion, he's going to like take a numbing shot there are pretty low. So Chow suspected he's just going to tough it out and play through it. Well, in those situations, like, I just think you don't want to get that hand hit as much as possible. So keeping Brady upright, keeping him protected is going to be of paramount importance. I believe the entire offense is going to step up even more so than they already would, understanding that their leader is slightly wounded and they need to be on their A game to make sure he doesn't take any big hits or anything like that. But I also think that why would you want a lot of snaps to go right and smack into that throwing hand if you don't need to? And the New England Patriots, when they are in shotgun this season, again, stuff from Sharp Football Stats, 85% of the time they are throwing the ball when Brady is in shotgun. That is the seventh highest pass rate of any team in the league when a shotgun snap is taken. So obviously this is a different type of game, and 15% of the time during the season, Brady does hand the ball off when he is in shotgun. So maybe that increases a slight bit. But if we are going to guess that Tom Brady is going to be in shotgun more because they don't want to keep having the football smack into his hand every time he takes a snap, even if it's not 85% of the time that he is in shotgun, is he throwing a pass, even if it's 75% or 65%, you're still talking about a higher pass rate than otherwise normal if he was under center. So I'm thinking that just due to the nature of this injury, even though it's like counterintuitive, right? Like you would think you would want to run the ball a little bit more because your hand's messed up. But if you're in shotgun, it's easier to throw the football and less productive to run it. I would think that it's a give and take. What's your take on that, Evan, in general? I know we haven't talked about this in our pre-discussion call. So do you have any opinion on that?
I really don't. I just would lean toward like agreeing with you. I really don't have any strong opinion either way.
Okay, so that's one thing to consider, guys, when you're thinking about this game and the way that it might play out. There is a chance Brady could be under center, like nothing's wrong. But there's also a chance that because of this injury and stitches, he might be in shotgun more, which inevitably might lead to a few more passes than otherwise. Against.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think they're throwing the ball in this game. I know that it may make like some logical sense for them to hand the ball off more because of the hand injury. But I expect them to be in the shotgun a ton, and for them to try to manufacture easier completions if they're truly concerned about the hand. It's also entirely possible that they straight up aren't very concerned about the hand, and they just come out and run their normal offense, and we see them attacking in 12 personnel, attacking in 21 personnel, and attacking the weaknesses of the Jaguars defense and trying to keep Paul Leslie on the field and playing with tempo.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at some numbers here just so you guys know from Sharp Football Stats that this season when Dion Lewis was running the football out of shotgun, 3.9 yards per carry. And when Rex Burkhead was running the ball out of shotgun, 4.8 yards per carry. When Dion Lewis was running the ball out, from under center, when Tom Brady was under center, handing the ball off to him, 5.1 yards per carry, and Rex Burkhead was at 4.0 yards per carry. Obviously, a much higher sample size for those two players when they are running the ball from under center because they do it far more frequently. So just a couple stats to throw out there. So, Evan, let's talk about the other side of the ball now. Talk to us about Blake Bortles, the Jacksonville offense, Leonard Fournette. What are they going to do, and what do you think Bill Belichick is going to try to do to limit their production?
Well, the Patriots were relatively weak in run defense all year from a rushing efficiency standpoint. They've been really good in their last 3 games, holding opposing running backs to 2.7 yards per carry, 0 rushing TDs allowed during that span. They may get Alan Branch back this week. They simply didn't determine that Alan Branch was one of their 46 most valuable players last week, so they left him on the sidelines. But they may bring him back this week to face off with Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette left last week's game, missed about the entire second quarter with an ankle injury. I think that there's technically no like structural damage with his injury. He was able to return, but this is an ongoing problem. This is something that has plagued Leonard Fournette since training camp. I guess they call it like spring practices or fall practice at LSU in his final season in college. I think that TJ Yeldon is a really interesting weapon that the Jaguars have. I think he's a really interesting, like, low-cost daily fantasy play this week. The Patriots allowed the 3rd most receiving yards per game to running backs this season. And TJ Yeldon, especially if Leonard Fournette has another aggravation of his injury, TJ Yeldon is going to get more of a featured role. Even last week, before Leonard Fournette suffered that aggravation, they gave TJ Yeldon some scoring position carries, and he actually scored a touchdown. I think it was from like 4 yards out, right down near the goal line. He's going to play in the passing game. If the Jaguars fall behind the Patriots, which is entirely conceivable, they're still, 7 or 8 point dogs on the road in Foxborough, TJ Yeldon would play more because he is their designated passing down specialist. In the receiving game, we've started to see D.D. Westbrook and Marquise Lee rise to the top of the Jaguars' wide receiver core, whereas Keelan Cole, and I know Keelan Cole caught a bomb last week, but he only played 36% of the snaps, and Allen Hurns dropped down to 30%. D.D. Westbrook was at 69%, Marquise Lee at 64%, and we may see them rise up even a little bit more this week. So those guys are interesting. I think that we will see Stephon Gilmore primarily on Marquise Lee due to size, and D.D. Westbrook square off with Malcolm Butler. Malcolm Butler, of course, gave up a couple of touchdowns last week to Corey Davis. Blake Bortles, I think that they're going to try to run him. They've been having a lot of success doing that. The Patriots have faced a lot of dual threat quarterbacks this season. Some of them have had good rushing games, others have not. And then Blake Bortles, how he is going to fare as a passer is just kind of always up in the air to me at this point. I don't think you can trust him to be necessarily bad, and you can't trust him, obviously, to be very good. So it's not an easy offense to analyze overall. They have scored a lot of points recently. I mean, they've scored 30 or more points in 5 of their last 7 and 24 or more in 6 of their last 8. That's like a half-season sample size, suggesting that they're scoring more than they are probably perceived as scoring. So I think that if Brady is 90% and the Patriots do what they do, which is usually score points because they will find your weaknesses and attack them relentlessly, I think that this game actually can end up going back over, even with all the money on the under.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be fascinating to see, the health of Brady. And I will tell you this, guys, what we will probably see, I mean, this is, again, speculation, but I believe that we will probably see money come back in on the Patriots and potentially on the over if Tom Brady's flinging it around pregame, because this is the first game of the day. We're going to see the pregame. We're going to, as long as he's not declared inactive, which Evan, I think that's an hour and a half before the game. So that would be at 1:30 p.m. Eastern is when they'll probably release the inactives for this game. And assuming Brady's not on it, we should be seeing him warming up on the field. And maybe he does more than usual. Maybe he does less than usual. Maybe he does more behind the scenes, like Ben Roethlisberger used to throw the ball around in the tunnels up in Pittsburgh. Who knows what's going to happen, but assuming he's out on the field throwing the football a little bit, if he looks like he's able to throw the ball, 20, 30 yards down the field, and his passes look like they've got velocity on them, my guess is we will see some money at that time. But until that point, there's going to be, and I guess justifiably so, some question marks as to whether or not he's going to be able to perform well in this spot against the difficult defense. But for Jacksonville and their offense, I think that there's a definite approach that they're going to try to run the football here. But it will be interesting because last week they came out throwing the ball a little bit against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, obviously, as you mentioned, the Patriots' run defense has improved over the course of the entire year. Their run defense ranked 30th, and that came against the third easiest schedule of opposing run offenses. However, looking at some of their trending performance over the last month, that run defense has improved up to 21st, but their best asset has been their ability to limit explosive run plays, where on the season they were 21st, and they have improved that all the way to the sixth best explosive run defense. Now, the Jacksonville Jaguars have moved offensively to the number one most explosive run offense. We've seen that Leonard Fournette busting some run gains out, and we've also seen T.J. Yeldon on occasion doing that as well. One thing that I will say before we move on, final point about Jacksonville's rushing offense, is the fact that, yes, there were some highs and lows for them on the season in terms of some of their dips and valleys, and looked like Leonard Fournette was getting worn down and his production really wasn't there. But I went back and looked. You can look at there's a trending page up at Sharp Football Stats where it shows you week by week what exactly these rushers are doing on a per week basis. And his worst game was Week 10 against the LA Chargers. And if I'm not mistaken, Evan, Week 10 was the week that what is his name? Merriweather, the middle linebacker for the LA Chargers, who injured himself in
Perryman.
There you go, Perryman. He was out. He missed most of the season. He was their signal caller. He hurt himself in like the second to last preseason game. He came back, I believe, Week 10. He was IR designated to return. Came back Week 10, and that run defense looked much better for that week. So they were better than their overall ranking on the year, which was 27th. With him in there, they looked great. The very next week, Leonard Fournette struggled against the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland ranked number 4 in run defensive efficiency. The next week, he struggled a little bit as well against the Arizona Cardinals. Arizona ranked number 1 in run defensive efficiency. And from that point onward, those were his 3 worst games of the year in terms of success rate for the rushing offense of the Jaguars. But from that point on, they were at worst like a 43 to 44% success rate team. And the last 3 games that they played against the Titans, who actually have the 7th best run defense, but then against the Buffalo Bills and the Pittsburgh Steelers, he posted, and the team overall, rushing offense, posted pretty decent rushing metrics. So I think that a lot of the dip in his production, of course he got run down, of course he was dealing with some injuries, but they were playing some very good run defenses for a good stretch of the middle portion of the season, not to mention that you take the Colts, who are much better run defense than pass defense, and the Seahawks, who they played week 14 in there, as well as the Houston Texans week 15. I mean, there's some decent run defenses, and they even played the San Francisco 49ers week 16. And you and I, Evan, we talked about on the podcast that the 49ers, once Jimmy Garoppolo got there, the defense had a lot more rest and time on the sidelines. Their run defense got much better at the very end of the season. And so, of course, he played them week 16. So I think that he's going to look potentially better than what people think if they're under the impression that he's worn down, he hasn't looked great the second half of the season. The Steelers, that's an aberration. He's not going to have a good game here. The Patriots are better, but I'm just saying that Leonard Fournette maybe is not as bad as he was looking for a stretch of the season. That was a lot due to the strength of schedule that he faced. Ultimately, the Patriots going to do a lot of, I think, defensively in terms of matchups to what the Jaguars themselves are going to do against the Patriots offense. A lot of man coverage, force Blake Bortles to beat him. And I think it's going to be on Blake, whether or not he can hit some of those deep balls and that sort of thing will probably carry the day. I will, last thing, and I mean it this time, Jacksonville has actually been very good inside the red zone. That's one of the things that New England Patriots excel at defensively, is limiting teams in the red zone. Jacksonville's offense actually been surprisingly great inside the red zone when they do get down there. So I'm very, very intrigued to see that matchup. And I do think that there's a great chance this game will live up to the hype, start us off on a great Sunday of games, because I think there's a lot of compelling matchups on both sides. Evan, anything more before we jump into the NFC Championship game?
No, jump in the next one.
All right, so we've got the Minnesota Vikings going out to Philadelphia to take on the Eagles, and this line will start there. Opened at around 4 at a couple of spots, a soft 4, and guys immediately grabbed up the 4. They took Philly as the home dog plus 4. Then most other spots open at 3.5. They also grabbed Philly plus the 3.5 as the home underdog. This line currently is down at Minnesota -3, and the total really hasn't done a whole lot. It opened at 38.5. It's about 38.5, a couple 39s. Not a whole lot of movement on the total. We saw a little bit of kind of a trending towards the under, and then a little bit of a sharper wave of over money came in. But it clearly does not look like that's a very big move or a consensus move amongst the number of groups, because the total is still basically where it was to start the week. You definitely have some edges here for people believing that the home underdog is in a great situation. Probably guys are taking Philadelphia on the money line. I've seen some people mention that they think this is a big pros versus Joes matchup and that all the sharp guys are on the Philadelphia Eagles. I would think twice about assuming that to be the case. I have seen a fair amount of Joes on the Philadelphia Eagles as well here, looking to take this team who is wearing the German Shepherd masks and is trying to get it done again at home as an underdog, thinking that, hey, these Minnesota Vikings barely beat the Saints last week. They shouldn't even be here. Mentally, they're probably jacked up because of that crazy victory, and they aren't going to be well prepared for this game, and all that type of narrative that people like to talk themselves into, believing whatever they want to believe for the game. I think this is going to be a great game, Evan. I think it's going to be competitive. I think it really, a lot of edges for both teams here could go either way. Most of the edges, though, on the defensive side of the ball. But I'll definitely turn it over to you to go ahead and break it down however you want to start with this game, the second game of the day on Sunday.
Yeah, definitely, like being a fantasy football analyst, it's not a game that, I'm like, oh, this guy could have a big game. This guy could have a big game. They're just very small little advantages that you're like, oh, well, maybe this guy could have a decent game here. I mean, we're dealing with two elite defenses. I mean, truly, top 5, top 3 defenses. And I think it's probably going to be a low-scoring game. Low-scoring games can turn into higher-scoring games when, a punt gets fumbled, field position things, a breakdown in coverage, But this game maps out as a low-scoring one on paper as far as I'm concerned. I think there are three little edges that I wanted to talk about, and they're player-oriented. The one on the Vikings side would be with Nelson Aguilar. So the Saints aggressively attacked the Vikings slot corner, Mackenzie Alexander, in pass coverage last week, targeted him 6 times. Bucky Brooks, really good follow on Twitter of NFL Network, former NFL scout. It was funny. He called Mackenzie Alexander Waldo because that was the guy you want to find, and you want to go after that guy. And Mackenzie Alexander plays slot corner for the Vikings. Nelson Aguilar runs almost 90% of his routes in the slot. Nelson Aguilar did not have a big game last week. I thought he would do a little bit better. They did use him on a couple of designed runs, so he wasn't a total zero. But he is an interesting bounce back candidate, I think, in this matchup on the Eagles side. On the other side, the Eagles were so good in run defense all year, and they were also so good at defending running back passes all year. So when we're looking at the Vikings backfield, all we really have to look at, there's no great stats to pull that suggest, McKinnon could have a bigger game or Latavius Murray could have a bigger game. I'm just looking at the last game, and Devontae Freeman, more of the inside runner for the Falcons, he was stopped dead in his tracks, 10 carries for 7 yards. And then Tevin Coleman had a lot more success running on the edges against the Eagles, 10 carries for 79 yards. Most of that came on perimeter runs. The better perimeter runner for the Vikings is Jerick McKinnon. Latavius Murray is the guy that they will slam between the tackles. And the last one is that, so in Week 17, Adam Thielen ran 65% of his routes in the slot. That was his most since Week 5. In the divisional round, the first time that we had seen Adam Thielen since Week 17, he ran over 70% of his routes outside. And they used him as almost a full-time outside receiver. The reason that they did that is because they went with Jarius Wright as their slot receiver. Jarius Wright is he's a full slot receiver. So when they decided to go with him full-time over Laquan Treadwell and Michael Floyd, who they obviously would mix in during the regular season, and that would lower – and those guys play more outside, so that would lower Jarius Wright's playing time. But if they're going to go with Jarius Wright again, then we're going to see Thielen and Stephon Diggs almost solely on the outside. And that, I think, is the best place to attack the Eagles, is with your outside receivers, specifically against Jalen Mills, who's allowed 5 touchdowns in the Eagles' last 5 games. Ronald Darby has been more solid, but I think that he's not quite a shutdown corner, and I think that Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen can win against him. Shoot, they were winning against Adam Thielen won plenty against Marshawn Lattimore last week on the outside. And then I was just looking at specifically which Vikings receiver might be more likely to be running routes at Jalen Mills, and the answer to that one was Stephon Diggs. Just based on percentages, Jalen Mills is always at left cornerback, and Stephon Diggs ran the most routes in the Vikings pass catcher corps by a significant margin at left cornerbacks this season. So those are just a couple of player edges that stand out to me. Again, I anticipate this being a low-scoring game, but I'm excited to watch it just as a pure football fan for sure.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. I think there's going to be difficulty. We're talking at this point when the Vikings have the football. The Philadelphia Eagles' third down defense, I know that the Vikings' third down defense is historic, record-breaking, but the Philadelphia Eagles have a darn good third down defense in their own right. And Minnesota has not faced as stingy of a defense on the road this season from a third down perspective. They played that game in Pittsburgh. They had the 6th-ranked third down defense, and of course that was the first game for Case Keenum. So that's a little bit of a game that you just want to toss out to some extent because he wasn't in rhythm with that team. But the best third down defenses that they have faced were teams like the Rams or the Ravens, and they got the fortune of playing both of those games at home. Apart from those, the most difficult game that they played was at Carolina. Of course, that game against the Steelers, which you're saying to throw out, and the game in Washington, and they were severely tested in that game in Washington. Their offense still put up a strong point production overall, but that was a game that the Redskins fared a lot better than many people thought that they would. So I do think that it's going this side of the ball, truthfully, is going to come down to, in my opinion, the pass protection on Case Keenum, because there are some times when that's not all that great, and the pass rush of the Philadelphia Eagles is better at home. And I think that if they can rattle Case Keenum, they do have a very good shot here, because I think the run game is going to be severely tested. The strength of schedule that Minnesota has faced in terms of rushing defenses they've played this year has not been all that superb. And the Philadelphia Eagles, a very sound run defense. They rank 3rd overall in run defensive efficiency, 10th best in run defensive success rate. I will say that they're trending a little bit worse than that. However, they did have to go up against, of course, Todd Gurley in Week 14. They played the Falcons' run defense last week, and you mentioned how they were pretty good in that game. So they have played some good run defenses, which is probably one of the reasons why they may not be trending quite as well. And it's going to be a very difficult side of the football to expect a lot. I do think they'll have to get it done through the air, through some explosive plays, through some matchups against some of those DBs, as you just mentioned there. Evan, talk to us about the other side of the ball now, when the Philadelphia Eagles offense and Nick Foles is out on the field against a very good Vikings defense.
Jay Ajayi, this is one of the worst matchups for any running back. I mean, the Vikings over their last 4 games held opposing RBs to 2.9 yards per carry, 1 rushing touchdown, almost completely shut down the Saints running attack last week. So it's going to be a really difficult go for Jay Ajayi. You're going to hope for, individual plays, which is something that he's capable. He's capable of ripping big individual plays. And we did see him get the most touches so far that he has gotten in an Eagles uniform. He needs to get more. He had 18 last week. He still needs more. I mean, they wasted 9 carries for 19 yards on LeGarrette Blount. They need to go with Jay Ajayi. I mean, they need to take their chances with their most explosive player. I don't know what else there is to say about him. And then, I know that you have some concerns about Nick Foles' health. I do as well. He has battled elbow problems in his throwing arm since as far back as November of 2016. He actually considered retiring at a couple of different points. And then he missed the entire preseason with an elbow injury. And then he has gone 2 of 15 on passes thrown 20-plus yards downfield this season, 13.3% completion rate with an interception. And, I mean, they're not even asking him to make throws downfield at this point. So I think that the Vikings game plan needs to be take away, those slants out of RPOs, the run-pass option. Take away those slants to Alshon Jeffrey and shut down the Eagles running backs in the passing game, which, hey, they've already done that this year, and try to force Nick Foles to make downfield throws, because I don't think he's even capable of doing it. I think that the Eagles play calling tells us that they know he's not capable of doing it.
Yeah, it's It's interesting. So there's a few different things to discuss here. And the first one that I would start with is, like you just said, because I do think that the Philadelphia Eagles will want to run the ball and establish a run game. Although it will not shock me if they come out of the box, their very first offensive play on 1st and 10, and just chuck it down the field and hope to get a PI. I've seen that against the Oakland Raiders, the first play of the game. I saw that against the Atlanta Falcons. The first play of the game is them just chucking it deep, hoping it gets there, and if it doesn't, hoping to get a PI. So be on the lookout for that potentially. But what I will say is that, you know, the Eagles rank 17th in run efficiency, but that has come this year against the 5th easiest schedule of opposing rushing defenses. If you look at their trending rushing offense since week 14, despite playing no run defenses, which rank inside the top 15, they've produced a rushing success rate of just 36%. That's 31st in the NFL, so second worst in the NFL. And the Vikings, of course, we know this, great run defense. This is a team that is the 5th most efficient run defense, and that's come against the, I believe it's the 4th most difficult schedule of run defenses. So it's a battle-tested run defense. I'm aware that there are home-road splits. They play a little bit better at home when they're playing run defense. But that being said, you know, you do have to account for who they're playing at home versus who they're playing on the road. And when they're playing road games against, obviously, the Pittsburgh Steelers on the road, and they're playing, rushing offenses like Cam Newton and the Atlanta Falcons, both those were games that they had on the road this year. You know, that's going to weigh into a little bit and skew some of those results slightly. But the point being, I think it's going to be difficult for Jay Ajayi. And the thing with Jay Ajayi, and this carries true from what he did down in Miami and to what he's been able to do up here in Philadelphia, he's a very explosive running back. But when he's not explosive, oftentimes he's not gaining the 4.5, 5 yards that successful running backs will get on a more consistent basis. He's getting stuffed a lot closer to the line of scrimmage. What that inevitably does, it's going to force the Eagles to overcome that and compensate for that. Carson Wentz was a magician, the best in the NFL at his passer rating and yards per attempt on third down, specifically 3rd and long. But, you know, obviously Nick Foles has not really been able to do that. He's one of the worst in the NFL at passing on 3rd downs. So I think that you're going to see Minnesota try to stop the run. Again, this is pretty much a consistent theme in the postseason, is trying to stop the run. But all these teams with their quarterback situations especially, now you're like, I don't want to say you're leveling the field. There's no way that Tom Brady, even with a messed up hand a little bit, is level with Blake Bortles. But you take the one bona fide, first ballot Hall of Famer, and you slice up his hand right before the game, give him some stitches. You now have like a set of quarterbacks here that are going to need their run games. And I think the defenses are aware of that in every single one of these. And so if Minnesota is able to stop the run, and we're given a little bit of drawbacks about the offensive rushing of the Philadelphia Eagles, then it's going to be on Nick Foles to throw the ball down the field. And he, not necessarily down the field, but the reason I think he may have to beat them down the field is because Minnesota is so good at the short passing defense. I mean, if there's one avenue where you're going to be able to exploit Minnesota to some extent in the passing game, it's some of the passes over the top of this defense. A lot of the short stuff, especially stuff to the running backs, they're one of the best in the NFL. We saw how good they did last week against the pairing of Kamara and Ingram. They're so good at stopping running back passes. And a lot of the short stuff they're very good at as well. And if they can take away a lot of that RPO stuff from the Philadelphia Eagles, that's going to make the job a lot more difficult on Nick Foles to try to find other avenues for success. Now, if the RPO stuff is working and they're at very high efficiency on the shorter passes, then Philadelphia is going to keep doing that. They're going to do that all the way down the field on them with a couple deep shots scattered in there. But the issue with Nick Foles has been his ability to complete passes deep down the field. You mentioned the 2 of 15 on passes 20-plus yards in the air. How about this one? In the games that he has started, he's played the Giants, the Raiders, the Cowboys, and the Falcons. On deep passes this past year, passer ratings allowed by those 4 teams, they rank 32nd, 24th, 21st, and 19th. So every single one of them, even the Falcons, below average to like bottom 10, which are the Raiders and the Giants. The Giants were the worst team in the NFL in passer rating on passes 15 or more yards in the air. Nick Foles, as a starter against those mediocre to terrible defenses, 2 of 18 on passes 15 or more yards in the air, 16.4 passer rating, no touchdowns, 1 interception on those passes. So they aren't going deep quite as much, and they're not having a lot of success doing it. It's going to be interesting whether or not Minnesota picks up on that and tries to force them to try to go deep, or if Nick Foles is able to overcome that and does have success going deep. So those are questions we're going to find out the answers to on Sunday, which is one of the reasons I'm really looking forward to the matchup on that side of the ball. But I do think it's going to be fascinating, I think, for Philadelphia to pull out the outright upset at home and advance to the Super Bowl. They are going to need Nick Foles to have a very good game, and he obviously has been a little bit hit or miss. But then again, you are going up against Case Keenum on the road. Case Keenum hasn't been quite as good on the road. The last 2 road games that they've even had, they lost in Carolina, and then, of course, didn't have to do a whole lot against the Packers, but they still only put up 16 points. That game was 16-0, week 16. They basically used their defense to win that game, and I kind of think the same formula is going to be true here. We're going to see one of these teams really try to use their defense to win this game. The only way I see this game hitting this total, getting close to going over this total, if it does, is one of 2 ways. Either short fields set up by the defenses, or if we get a situation like we had last week where one of the teams down by 1 score, in the third quarter they drive, they score a touchdown, they kick a field goal, whatever, they take the lead. Now the team is trailing, has the ball. If we get into a situation where the team is trailing, has the ball, we could see some back and forth here. The only other avenue I could see, Evan, is if neither run game is very productive, we might see just the teams have to pass a little bit more, but I still don't see them going too crazy with either quarterback here getting too pass heavy. Any final thoughts on this matchup?
No, nothing really stands out. Could have commented that maybe it would be a little edge for the Eagles if Andrew Sendejo, who got knocked out of last week's game on that collision with Michael Thomas, if he were out, we could comment on that, but it looks like he's going to play. No really big injury situations. It's going to be I think it's going to be like an old school kind of football game. Not a lot of fireworks, but it's going to be a great watch.
Yeah, and in terms of props and that sort of thing, I can tell you that unfortunately they pulled all the props both in Vegas and offshore for the first game of the day, the Jacksonville-New England game. And there's a number of those that I isolated and was looking to look towards some value. However, those are only up at like 1 or 2 books early in the day on Friday, and then they pulled them down with the injury status and all the money coming in on the Jaguars and the under. So we'll see once they put those up what those numbers are, but there are a couple players in that game that I think are of some value, so I'm going to be looking to target some of those props. But for the props that are up on the Philadelphia-Minnesota game, I have not done anything with any of those yet, nor have done anything with the side or total in that game. So I guess, Evan, that winds it up for this weekend. I don't think that these games there's a chance they could live up to the hype from last week, but last week's games were just phenomenal. I still think we're going to see a couple of great battles, maybe some styles that look a little bit similar, but I'm just really looking forward to these games. I know you are as well. Guys, one last time, you can follow Evan on Twitter at Evan Silva. He wrote up a detailed matchups article. If you want to check the matchups article out, it's on RotoWorld. You can find it on his Twitter timeline as well. So check that out. He listed all the different players there and what he thought that they would be able to do in these games. You can follow me on Twitter at Sharp Football. Be sure to check out Sharp Football Stats. I appreciate all of you guys for the great feedback you gave me on that article. I usually don't write articles this time of the year, but I felt like this one had important enough information to get out there. So I appreciate all of you guys sharing that, retweeting it, spreading the word. That definitely helps gain some vision into Sharp Football Stats, which is obviously a pursuit of mine that I'm looking to grow and evolve as much as possible. So I appreciate that. We appreciate you guys checking out the podcast, leaving reviews, helping this continue to grow. And with that said, Evan, I'll sign us off. We're looking forward to recording a pretty big Super Bowl podcast. I've got some ideas of some special guests that we might be able to bring on the show to share some prop bets. I really think it's going to be a great show. So no podcast next week, guys, but the following week we'll definitely have one before the Super Bowl. Looking forward to it. Enjoy the games on Sunday, and we'll talk to you later.